Leah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is really interesting. You're a friend of the show that's never been on the podcast, but I remember the first time we ever connected. I was doing a podcast for an organization called Mockingbird, and you pitched a book to me, and that was Melissa Phoebos's Whip Smart. And I loved that book. And you've pitched many books to me before, and for years we've known each other, and that is you were sort of my inroad to the publicity world. I knew nothing. You were really the first publicist I knew well, and I feel like I've learned a lot through you. So you have now gone from being a publicist to being an educator around publishing books, right?
Yes, well, I have, and I remember that first interview very well. And we were setting up so many interviews, and yours was just really special. It went to places that other interviewers just really didn't go. It really went. It stayed focused on the book in a great way, but it also was, you just used it as a launching point to talk about life and just so many different things. So that was, listening to that, I was like, all right, I like this guy. I gotta pitch more of my authors to him. So yes, but I am, in terms of me being an educator, my main business for years has been doing book publicity. So working with authors to.
And you were a publicist before that, right? Before you hung a shingle, you were in publicity, right? You were in publishing stuff.
I am actually one of the few independent book publicists that has never worked at a publishing.
All right. Well, there you go. See, this is one of those things where I need an intern. Somebody's got to be like, do your homework. But you went. But what did you do? You went to Cornell, right?
I went to Cornell. When I first graduated, I got a job as a magazine editor at this small magazine in New York. It was a glossy monthly magazine. It was an absolutely bonkers place to work. But I worked there for 3 years, and I probably learned like at least a decade's worth in terms of experience, because it was like 3 or 4 of us putting together this monthly magazine. So not good for work-life balance, not good for emotional health. It was very stressful, but I learned a ton, and it was really interesting. And I was just thrown into the mix of media, and I was fielding all of the queries from publicists and all of the ideas that our writers would be.
Can you just give us a picture of like when was this in time? When was this?
This was in 1998.
Okay, so it's the late 90s. It's pre 9/11. It's New York City. You're in New York at that time, right?
I'm in New York at that time.
Are you living like the Sex and the City lifestyle? I mean, are you having Cosmos? Are you laid out? I mean, is it as glamorous as it sounds? That sounds very glamorous, being at a magazine and being young and single in New York. That sounds very, very hip.
It was really fun. It was hip. I mean, it wasn't sort of Sex in the City in that, I was like sharing. I got, it was back when you found your apartment by looking at the back of the Village Voice, which makes me sound like I'm 100 years old. But, that's how I found my apartment. And I was sharing. I just rented a room from a woman that I met that way. And, at that point, I think I was making absolute peanuts. So it was this weird world where I was, it was a magazine that covered Manhattan arts and culture and restaurants and nightlife. So I was around all of this sort of glamour and a lot of money. But I was still, a 21-year-old making, I don't know, $24,000 a year. So it was sort of straddling those worlds, but it was fun.
Like social workers were making more money than that.
I didn't make any money. It was insane. And, but I did have a lot of luxury beauty products because it was sort of, those were perks of the job. So
basically
I barely have money to buy lunch, but
your skin looked like you were making $120,000 a year, even though you're at $24,000 a year.
Exactly. And then, the woman who ran it, instead of a raise, she's like, no, I can't give you a raise, but I will give you $600 credit to this boutique down the block. So then I'd have these fancy items of clothing, but still have no money. So it was a weird world, but it did.
How is that existentially to look put together? So you have all these beauty products and you're dressed to the nines and you've got the boutique, but you have no money and you're eating like ramen noodle. I mean, what is that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's different. Like, I think that would be different if it were like now when I'm, about to be 49, it would be a different situation. At 21, 22, 23, none of my friends had any money. We were all kind of living in the city and, had interesting jobs where we were learning a lot, but didn't make any money. So I think at that point in your life, it makes sense. It works. It would be harder now for sure.
So you decide you're getting the book credit, boutique credits. You got the great makeup and you think, I'm going to get out of this and go into being the publicity world.
Yeah, well, so there are a couple other steps before Publicity. So the magazine folded after 9/11. So then I worked as freelance writer.
Why did it fold? I mean, what was the? I mean, a lot. Obviously, that was a tragic and disruptive time.
Yeah.
But why this particular magazine folding?
I mean, I can't say it was a very well managed magazine. I had stories. It was a little bit of a crazy place. I was the one that would come out to the bar to meet all my friends and have the insane stories from the magazine world. But those stories were also sort of involved a lot of. I'm trying to think about how to be diplomatic and say this. It was an insane place. Let me leave it at that. They did not manage that business well, so it was already on the rocks. And then when 9/11 happened, I think it was just sort of an excuse to, okay, like it was not doing well. Let's just call it a day. But
and that's a business that would be very difficult to open today, right? Basically.
Well, I mean, there was so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't exist now. I mean, it does, but I mean, it's not a great proposition.
It's so expensive to produce a magazine like that. Just so unbelievably expensive every step of the way. So no, I don't think it would really make sense. I mean, there's a few of them where, there's if you have a really targeted audience, and that's sort of a captive audience. So I think now in its place, there are some magazines that, deliver solely to the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side, and they give them out and they just survive through advertising money. But it's definitely not the way of the future. But after it folded, I worked at Scholastic for a little bit, and then I went to Condé Nast. So I was an editor at Condé Nast before I made the shift over to public relations.
For our listeners, I'm sure just about every one of our listeners had Scholastic textbooks, right? At some point.
Yeah, no, I mean, Scholastic is a massive business. It was fun working there. I did not stay too long because I got the job at Condé Nast and I left. But it was really fun. I mean, it was nice just going into an environment and being like, this is a completely different project. You're going to use the same skills, but it has absolutely nothing to do with this glossy, high style arts and entertainment magazine that you are working at. Now you are going to write, stories highlighting people in STEM for fourth graders. So it was a fun project to take all of those skills and then just have to reset the audience and the voice and the content. So I enjoyed it, but it didn't last too long because then, like I said, I went to Condé Nast and worked at Lucky Magazine, which I don't know if you remember Lucky magazine. It was huge in its day. I was there at the heyday, and it was a magazine about shopping, which was ironic because I actually hate shopping. I've always hated shopping, but it was incredibly popular. And I was there for 3 years. And one of the things I always say is that I learned so much about that I use in my business doing book publicity from working at Lucky Magazine and having to figure out how to write about shoes in an interesting way, or how to write about handbags in an interesting way, because it sort of forced you to. We basically had this huge list of words we couldn't use. They were on the banned list. And then
what's on the ban? What couldn't you use?
So we had to describe all of these, accessories in little word, like 25, 35 word captions. And we had to make it interesting. The whole magazine, that's what the whole magazine was. So you
were like Elaine Bennis when she was working for the J. Peterman catalog.
Yeah. So you had to figure out how to make it interesting. You couldn't just be like, these are really comfortable shoes. And they, you had to make it interesting. And then the banned list was, stylish and chic and from day to night. And, all of these things like
what
that.
What is so bad from day to night? Why can't we say that? What is that seems very functional.
You can't have 80 pages of people describing 10 different, accessories and umbrellas and shirts as chic or from day to night, for example. So it really forced you to learn how to use this extreme economy of words and to tell a story about each item. And that
do you ever find yourself like at TJ Maxx or something and just, oh, this shoe, it's a lovely hue. And do you find yourself describing clothing in terms of that you used to write?
I think probably not. I think that kind of goes back to the fact that it was a great professional experience for me, but it just wasn't really aligned with what I care about that much. I mean, I care much more about books and ideas and authors.
That's very interesting for someone that's pretty, like, I know you and we've hung out many times in person and stuff. And for someone I don't know if this is the right time, put together. I feel like you always look nice. You're very fashionable. That surprises me that you have a relative indifference to clothing, to shopping and these kinds of things, because you're very stylish.
Oh, well, Scott, thank you so much. I like to have nice clothes. I like to try and present myself well. The act of shopping just gives me like instant onset ADHD. Like I can't focus. I just walk around and I just want to leave as quickly as I possibly can.
Like overstimulation is the problem.
I don't know. I mean, I think I just don't. I guess I like to get the things I want, but I hate the process, and it always feels to me like there's something that I would rather be doing than sitting here shopping and trying this on. So anyway, the point is, I left Lucky Magazine.
Well, I'm learning. This is so interesting because these are things I never asked you about ever. And I know you, but when you have a friendship, like an adult friendship, especially, you often, there's these huge gaps that we probably don't know each other. I had no idea that you were writing these captions for shoes and handbags.
There's a lot to discuss, and we talk about authors. We talk about politics when we talk, and we don't have time to go through every stage of our lives when we
don't. This is fantastic. I'm enjoying. All right, so let's move on from Lucky.
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So Lucky. Okay. So at Lucky, I was like, I cannot work in Times Square in a cubicle 5 days a week, commuting to Times Square. I hate it. Basically, was a huge part of my decision to leave. So I left to go freelance. I was freelance writing, freelance editing. So then I was writing for all sorts of places. I was writing for 17 magazine, for Marie Claire, for Elle. I was doing a lot of work like that. I wrote for the New York Post and the Daily News a bunch.
What was the thing from that period that you were most pleased with, that stands out to you, that, hey, I wrote this and I feel like still I would look at that and say, wow, I turned a few phrases or something that I wrote about something that I cared about? Or,
you know, I did a bunch of investigative stories for 17 that were, so they were geared towards teen girls, but they were real reporting. And one I did on a cult called the Children of God. And I had to talk to all these former cult members. And I mean, it was just a crazy, crazy story. But it was fascinating. I mean, I loved it. I loved the process of, just finding out about this world and then figuring out how to break into it to get people to talk to you, because for a good story you need sources. If you don't have sources and firsthand accounts, it's not a good story typically.
How long were most of these people in the cult? I mean, they're not raised in it, right? I mean, do they go in adult? Yeah. Oh, they're raised in it. So this is like, okay, so this isn't, hey, I'm 24 trying to find myself, I'm shaving my head and on a farm. This people are raised in this.
Yeah, I was talking to people that had been raised in the cult, and then in their 20s, they were like, whoa, this is crazy. Let me out. And so I was talking to them.
And so did you talk to them about their transition? I mean, that has got to be so, because I'm guessing you don't just do normal stuff like dating, going to the DMV, is everything traumatic when you've spent your life in a cult?
I was very clearly talking to people that were hugely traumatized, that had the entire ground ripped out from underneath them, and were really trying to get their bearings in the world, and just had nothing to stand on. It was sad. It was really, really hard.
Hard as awful as that sounds. It seems like a great thing to put in your dating profile. Like, hey, former cult member, ask me about that. What a great icebreaker.
I mean, you always want to get people interested, pique their curiosity. So
exactly. So you're doing freelance writing, and eventually, I mean, how do you get into the point where you say, look, I want to work for myself. Like, I'm done working for the man.
Yeah. So I guess that was when I went freelance, I don't want to be penned in for, 40 hours a week in a cubicle in Midtown, after, riding the train to and fro. But then I moved into publicity because, it was one of those situations where when you're in the world, you know how to do it. So it's like for you're a podcaster, you know how to do it. Anyone who sort of wants to come up, try and figure out how to do a podcast, it feels overwhelming. They have no idea what to do. But to you seems easy. So I sort of had that same thing happened, where because Lucky was such a huge magazine, and it was so powerful for brands and stores, anyone who owned anything, who wanted to get in the magazine, was like, oh my God, how do I get in? And anytime people heard I worked at Lucky, they had a million questions. Well, who should I send it to? Like, how do I do it? What do they need? And then just being in it, was like, it seemed obvious to me, but that was the moment that I realized, oh, I could maybe turn this into a business. I have this sort of knowledge about how media works that to me seems fairly straightforward, because I've just been in it now for many years, but it wasn't. So that was sort of how I made the pivot over to publicity. And at the beginning I was doing lifestyle and any sort of company like that. But then I got my first author client, who was Frank Delaney. I worked with him for 5 years. He had a book a year contract with Random House. And I just worked with him on all of those books. He's this amazing man. He passed away recently, but he wrote the bestseller Ireland. He wrote Irish historical fiction. He had this like beautiful voice, and just a real like man of letters. Like, he was a kind of person where when you met him, anyone who met him would be like, oh, he's a presence. He's famous. Like, you meet him and you're like, that's a famous person, even though he wasn't that famous in the US at that point, but he just had that aura. So I worked with him for 5 years, and that was sort of the entry point. Then I started getting work word of mouth, and you should work with this author and that author. So that was my entree into book publicity. And from there, I was doing it under my own name for a while. And when my second son was born, I took some time off. And then when I came back, I was like, all right, let's make this thing a business.
And you do this with your husband. You guys,
Yeah.
This is a family business.
Family business now. Yeah. Press shop. I started it on my own, but then I'm not exactly sure of the timeline, but after a couple of years, it was going well. He was in finance. Never really loved it, but his particular space in finance kind of cratered after the 2008 financial meltdown. And so we were like, well, let's see what happens if we work together. I really had no expectation that it would work well. I thought it would be a month or two, and then I'd be like, okay, send that resume out. But we're still doing it many, many, many years later. It works really, really well. It's really nice for having kids. I mean, we have 2 kids, so it really allows us some flexibility with having kids. And it's also a job it just requires a lot of thought and consideration. And, sometimes answers or angles aren't obvious. You kind of have to chew on them a while. Like, how do we position this book? Who would go for it? Is that the right strategy for this book? And it's really helpful to just have someone by my side. We talk about these things all day long, and it's incredibly helpful. It's much, much easier than doing it or leading a business on your own. I mean, I have 3 amazing employees as well. But yeah, it works really, really well. And somehow we still like each other.
This is a beautiful thing. Yeah, I want to get into what you do, your new venture, but I want to ask you a couple of things. I mean, I remember, so one of my close friends, a close mutual friend of ours, David Shields, is one of the clients. You've done work for him on a book on Donald Trump, and I remember, I still think that's the best Trump book I've ever read, and that book was very formative for me, and then that our conversation, which you connected us, that developed a real deep friendship, and we've collaborated, we've co-authored a book together, and we do tons of podcast stuff and other things, and we talk all the time about everything in the world. But so thank you for that. But I wonder, you live in New York, I've known you for it's just so interesting, right? Because there's this figure, Donald Trump, that for the past 12 years has just been the shadow over American politics and public life. How has the Trump era affected your work? I mean, I think it was obvious ways, like Tim Snyder, who, wrote a book on tyranny, is one of your big clients. I mean, but how is that different, doing what you've done for years in the age of Trump?
Oh boy. So, I mean, I could probably go on about this for a long time.
There's no commercial break. There's no, I have coffee.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay. So, I mean, I think I would say that, once he descended that golden escalator, it has been a real that was the moment that just began the fact that he took up such an inordinate amount of media oxygen and just space. So, right when that happened, we, from a just business perspective, I mean, forgetting all the other like political and, other reactions I had to him. But, just from a professional point of view, it was like, there's less time to go around, because every time, I mean, now it's faded a little bit because everybody can't freak out about every single thing he does. Although I do, but back then, it was so hard. We had so many authors that would be en route to NPR or MSNBC, and then, some big story with Trump, or Trump would say something crazy or tweet something crazy, and the car would have to turn around because it got bumped because everyone has to go cover it. So it definitely affected us in that way.
Happened multiple times
Yeah.
where you have to talk to an author. Hey, I'm real. And how do you let
And it
them
would
down?
always be the first thing.
Are you their emotional support animal at that point? I mean, because they're looking forward to Morning Joe, or oh my gosh, this is my big break, and then they're bumped. I mean, how do they?
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
I mean, I think for the most part, they're professionals and they understand. I mean, I think most of the people that we were working with that were going to those kind of high profile media hits they weren't like debut authors where it was like, oh my God, this is make or break. I could be this famous novelist or I could be an unknown. Like, it wasn't that stark. So, I wouldn't say it was that difficult in that way, but no matter what, I mean, even if you are a well-established author and you have a national media profile, it sucks to be on your way to MSNBC studio and have to turn around. So, there was that piece of it, and then, I think it, in some ways, because so much of the news media is about that, then a ton of our books became about that. Like, as soon as he ran, lots of acquisition editors and agents and the entire machinery of publishing kicked into gear. Like, okay, we need books about explaining what's going on here. So in time, our work portfolio sort of aligned a little bit more with what's going on. And that was when we ended up working on so many books that had a lot to say about the current moment. So, like you mentioned, Tim Snyder on Tyranny, Tom Nichols, The Death of Expertise. We worked with Brian Klaas.
Tom Nichols, 5-time Jeopardy winner.
Yes, that he knows his stuff, that guy.
And that was before you could. That was after, like, he was post Ken Jennings. He could have won more.
Yeah.
I mean, he had the mandatory sit down. He's been on the podcast, and I love that. I love that guy. I love that guy.
I know. So yeah, we worked with him and Brian Klaas, and we just worked with a lot of people speaking to the moment. So then just, what we were putting out there was much more aligned with what's going on. So then, we were able to get a lot of media attention because everybody wanted to hear these voices.
What do you think? Are there things you've learned through that kind of work that you don't think you would have known, or I mean, are there particular lenses that you've had on this thing we've been with it, the whole country's been through? I mean, whether you like Trump, don't like Trump, whatever your feelings are, or in between, this is undeniably just. He's ubiquitous, right? I mean, is there anything that you think you see or you've known because you've just dealt with so many people working on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, for one thing, it's like you always have to remember when you're doing any job, but also when you're doing this job, is that, like when you're pitching authors and you're pitching media, they're people, so they're producers that, are also living through this moment and are also searching for answers and having their own reactions to what's going on. So, I think that maybe you really kind of saw how, upsetting it was for everybody. I mean, it just really put everybody was off kilter. But I would say the other thing is it just really made you always sort of have to be incredibly nimble when you're working in media, because especially in this environment where the narratives are changing so quickly. And that, the Trump era really highlighted that, and just made everything speed up, like stories that would have lasted for days and been the top story were little blips. And so that was one thing we sort of had to figure out, is how to navigate that. Like, which is a story that's going to stick, which is a story that's going to just be, brought back to out to sea because the next wave came in. So, I think just figuring out how to navigate that, and knowing that, on all sides of it, everybody was trying to figure that out. There were so many changes, both because of the subject matter and that Trump brought, and at the very same time, over the past 8 years or however long it's been since he started running, 9 years, it's also coincided with massive changes in the information environment and how people are getting news and their information and their attention, and publishing too, how the rise of audiobooks and consolidation amongst publishing companies. So it's just really like what we do as book publicists. It's really sitting at this really intense intersection of fast moving parts that are hard to navigate.
Do you ever find yourself emotionally entangled with a book that you just love the book and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing, that your kind of emotions rise and fall with its rising and falling in the world of reception? Or are you just so self-differentiated that you're just like, oh my gosh, no?
No. I definitely. I think there's an element of, and we're lucky in that we take the books that we want to take for the most part at this point. Like we take books because we feel really strongly about them and we want to spread the message. So there is an element, like when we're getting to know the book and writing the pitch materials and talking with the author, like there's an element where I always get, just so excited and wanting to scream it from the rooftops, and get very invested. So I think that's just a part. I think you kind of have to have that personality a little bit to be a publicist. Is like you have to sort of see the best possible way of positioning things, but also just being a champion of ideas and people and things. So if you have to say no to an author, is it just like a bad date? Do you just go with it's not you, it's me? I hate it so much, honestly. I really, really hate that part of the job. The worst time, we have to say no to a lot of projects. So it's less difficult when I haven't engaged with it. And it's just like, well, like there was an author that came to us today with a great sounding book from a great publisher that's publishing in February, and we had to say no. Like we just don't have space in our schedule. So that sucks, but it's not hard. It's understandable. That's coming up really soon. We don't have any time to do it. The times that it's really hard is when it's a maybe case. And, I talk to the author and I read the book and I think about it and maybe we talk again. And then, for whatever reason, maybe we just don't see a clear enough path to promoting it in a way that we can be really confident that it's going to be successful, because we really don't want to take a project unless we can be very confident that we're going to be able to do a great job. Those are the ones that are really hard, because then it's, you're involved and you kind of, you care about the person and you got to know the work, and it wouldn't have gotten that far if we didn't like it. So those are the times that I just hate so much.
So you're doing this project that you're loving right now, Book Publicity School, where you're actually teaching authors how to take their ideas, take their book, make it in the world. Are you sort of thinking like, okay, how do I get the author to me? Or how do I get the author in the place where they're set up to succeed with a place like Press Shop, and where they're, are you thinking from both ends of the spectrum? Is that kind of how you've birthed this? Like, okay, I sort of know what it takes, so let's get them on the front end before they're well into the process. How do you birth this idea?
So I guess it came from this feeling at Press Shop where, there were a ton of books that we couldn't take on for any number of reasons. So it could be the schedule. Like I said, it's a February book. We're booked. We don't have time. Or it could be a book that, maybe it's published by it's a self-published book or a hybrid published book, where we just aren't confident enough that we're going to be able to get enough attention for it because it's so hard to promote those books in media. Or it could be because it's after publication, it's just not good timing, or the budget could be out of alignment with, having a full campaign. So there's so many of those books that just don't work for Press Shop. But for most of them, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them, I was like, I can definitely help. Like, I see what you need to do. We can't take it on as a full project where we're going to do it, but I can tell you what to do. So that was a big part of it, sort of trying to figure out another way of supporting authors that was less intensive and cheaper, frankly, than a full campaign. And then the other reason is that publishers these days require so much work from authors. The entire field, up and down, in editorial, marketing, publicity, everywhere in the publishing industry, they're just strapped. They're overworked. They don't have enough time to do what they need to do. So when it comes to publicity and marketing, publishers want people with a platform. They want people who are going to promote their books, and they pretty much need you to do that because their publicity staff is so overstretched. So, but a lot of authors are like, well, I have no idea how to do that. Like, I'm an author. What do you mean I should publicize my book? So that was where book publicity school started. It was like, well, okay, let's teach them how to publicize their book. Like, there's a lot of concepts and there's a lot of things they can do that might not be like a full-blown professional publicity campaign, but there's a lot you can do on your own, in terms of reaching out to your community and making sure your messaging is right and strong, and getting that on your website, and what to do with social media, and who to reach out to at a podcast that seems perfect for your book. What do you say? What do they need? So all of that kind of stuff is the kind of stuff we do in the workshops.
So, I mean, key, right, is the pitch idea, right? Like, you probably have a limited window, right? A publicist writes it, or if you're kind of running a shoestring operation, you're probably teaching authors how to do it, but you've got, my guess is just such a limited. It's like on dating apps, right? You've got a split second before that person swipes left or right? You got to catch their attention. You got to be snazzy. You want swiping right. What do you tell authors? What can you give, like a sneak preview here, like or like a sample, I guess, like when you were getting samples back in the $600. What's it like? What do you tell authors? How do you grab them?
Yeah. So, I guess there's a lot of things. One thing is, like you said, you have to think about where it's landing. So it's landing in this incredibly crowded inbox. So you don't have much time. You have to get, right away, you have to hook them. So, you need to figure out, okay, what is your hook? What is the most compelling way of positioning your book? That can be one of the hardest things. We have whole 90-minute courses just figuring that out. But some things that can help lead you to it are, what is the top line when you talk to somebody about it? I always tell people that they should talk about their books and see what resonates with people, because especially when an author is writing their book, writing their pitch, or writing their materials about their book, it's really hard to get out of their own writer head, which sort of knows all of the complexity of their book. And you have to put that aside. The pitch does not need to be about the entire book. You don't need to get every little nuance. You need to get the hook, the thing that's going to, catch people. And one way to, get some clarity on that is talking to people and seeing what interests people. I've seen authors talk and, share an origin story of their book. And like, to them, it's really meaningful. And then it doesn't work. Like, okay, no, that just doesn't work. And, it can be a perfectly fine story that, like, you can tell if you're on a long form podcast for, 45 minutes or 60 minutes, sure, share that origin story. Maybe it would work in that context, but that's not something that's going to bite people right away. People need to know what they are going to get from it, how it pushes the narrative forward. You never want to have something that feels old. Like you want to be cognizant of where the narrative in your topic or your genre is and give it something new, breathe some fresh air into it.
It's just a challenge because I think if you're creating content, if you're an artist, if you're an author, if what you obviously think what you're doing is interesting and compelling, right? Because you're married to it, right? This is you. I mean, this is coming out of you. You're looking at something that's you. But is that it? That's got to be challenging, right? I'm guessing you have to teach people to decouple from. Look, this is not. It's hard to understand, but this is not as interesting to everyone else as it is to you, or you've got to do the extra work to sell this thing. That might not be. It might not be obvious why it's important or compelling to somebody that you're trying to sway, right?
Yeah. So I always say that you need to think about how to pitch it and in a way that's interacting with someone else. So if you're writing it, don't write it in like a Google Doc or Scrivener or whatever you've been writing your book in, because then you go into your own writer headspace. Like do it in an email where you're thinking about, all right, what would I say to Mary Beth, who hosts this radio show that I would love to be on? So everything you say is like pointed towards Mary Beth, or Rose Beth, I can't remember the name I just said, but pointed to the person that you are speaking to, because people do that in conversation naturally. In conversation, the way people describe their book in conversation is very different than what they would say when they write it out. When they write it out, they, go into their writerly mode. In conversation, you are cognizant of what people are picking up. You're cognizant of how people are reacting and when they're getting bored and what's making them laugh. And you naturally go with that. So you have to figure out how to sort of pull that skill into the pitch writing.
Is there something emotionally, I'm wondering, dispositionally or something that because I like you're giving a sort of practical thing, like just change even your medium, right? Change, get in front of a different screen, get in front of a different, implement to send it. But I mean, is there some emotional disposition or something people can cultivate or have to cultivate to get out of their own head and get into the headspace of the person that they're pitching to? I mean, what does that take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's really hard for an author or anybody who is working on a big project and cares about it, to then sort of figure out how to step outside and be a little bit more objective. So, I think you really should try and draw on people. Of course, you have to be careful who you draw on. You don't want to take the advice of somebody who has no idea what they're talking about, so you have to figure that out. But I do think that when you are coming up with pitch materials or anything, any sort of promotional material, don't be the only one doing it. Like you need other eyes and you need other voices. I mean, even us, like when we're at Press Shop and we're writing a pitch and we don't have, we didn't write the book, so we're not as attached. But then at a certain point, we know the book, we've read all about the author and we care about it. And so, but whenever we're writing our pitches, we do this thing, we call it the power edit. And it's all of us come in, all 5 of us on the team come in and edit it. And I love that usually it's 2 people on the team don't really know anything about the book when they come in to do the power edit. And that's really helpful because even just working on the book, you get familiar and you take things for granted and think that people are going to understand this. And so it's really helpful to have that person that's never seen it before. And they're like, well, wait, who's Nancy? Or like, just, they have questions coming at it completely fresh, which is exactly how any person that you're cold pitching is coming on it.
I remember several years ago, Chris Matthews came out with a book, former MSNBC personality. He came out with a book called Life is a Campaign. And largely, this guy had been around political campaigns worked on them, covered them, and basically he was trying to sort of utilize what he learned from how people run campaigns for sort of advice to people in their everyday lives. Although when he went on Jon Stewart eviscerated him for this. But anyway, but that is neither here nor there. But I think about that. It seems to me that what you do in the work of publicity and then teaching authors how to market themselves, how to push their ideas and their work into the world, and it seems to me to have a lot of marketable application to just people's life. Because isn't everybody always pitching themselves, right, for jobs, for romantic relationships, for their in-laws, to their friend group, right? You're trying to get into that new friend group of the moms that you want to socialize with, because they seem to be able to break into all the sort of benefits that you want your kid to access in the school. You know, I mean, aren't people pitching themselves all the time? And do you find yourself, okay, wow, I can translate what I do to authors to how I can get it to pitch what I care about in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that persuasive argument and persuasive language is really what are a key part of publicity. You have to think of a story and then present it in a compelling way, concisely and persuasively. And yeah, we all do that. I mean, we all of like conversation in a million different ways in a million different parts of your life is about persuasion. You know, you want to, you know, and it doesn't, you know, I don't mean to make it sound so, you know, tacky that every time you're talking to someone, you're trying to persuade to get what you want. But, you know,
we're not all Don Drapers. So,
yeah. Right. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely, it's elements and skills and ways of presentation that come into play. You know, I think like one thing that people hear about a lot is that, you know, when it comes to authors, they're like, oh, you need an author brand. And so many authors are like, oh God, that's horrible. It's kill me. I don't want an author brand, which I get. Like, it's a really kind of alienating marketing language, and you don't want to think about yourself as having a brand. But then when you just think about it as just self-presentation, like, what do you want people to think of? Like, when they think of, you know, Scott Kent Jones, what do they think of? Are you this, like, you know, what is the persona? What is your personality? What is your
neurosis
world? Yeah. How neurotic are you? You know, so I think a lot of it is, you know, it does come down to things that are a part of just life and interacting with people and going about your life.
I mean, if we just saw in public life, I think a big failure in persuasion, right? In that Kamala Harris outspent Trump something like 3.5 to 1 or something. I mean, yeah. normally just in presidential campaigns, the person that spends the most wins. I mean, that didn't happen in 2016 and 2024. No, we could say that it, you know, they're both women, and what does that say about culture? But in general, it's like the person that raises the most money wins, and yet there was something. Was this a failure of persuasion? Was this because Trump won all the swing states, right? I mean, it wasn't massive. I mean, the win isn't massive, but it's, you know, it's not insignificant, right? I mean, yeah. Is this? I mean, were you feeling like you were living in failed persuasion space?
Right. I think that the number of people, and there was a fairly narrow slice of people that were persuadable in this election. And so it seems that the Trump campaign did a better job of reaching them. I think to me, it seems more about that. They were just super targeted on this hyper narrow, what was it, like 6 million people that they decided were the persuadable people. And then all they had to do was persuade them. And they did that in large part through new media. I mean, I think what came out of this, the media lessons and just a snapshot of the evolution of our information environment that was really clarified during this election, it really was about just finding where people are getting their news. Where are they getting their information? A lot of people aren't getting any news. So then what are they doing? Like, what? It doesn't take that much to persuade some people, because there are a lot of people, and I think a big part of the sliver that they determined was going to swing the election, that it was, are not paying attention to all the ins and outs. So all of these ads and all of this messaging, they just didn't even listen to it. They listened to some podcasts or some streaming, and that's where they got it. So they, they really masterfully, I hate to say, navigated the new media. Not even new media as new media is sort of a phrase that's now old. Now it's like new media.
Yeah. And Barron Trump, right, had his dad do a lot of, they're calling it now the manosphere, right? This is, but even that, it's very interesting because the way the left talks about men right now, right, is this is the whole thing. Somebody is, I actually wrote this to people. I'm sure I was quoting somebody, that this idea that it used to be that you had to like the politician. Now you have to believe the politician likes. It used to say, people say, Bush, he's the kind of guy you want to have a beer with. Now it's like you need him to want to have a beer with you, right? And it was just so. And something about the way that the left calls the manosphere, right, as if it's this thing, right? And Trump was able to, I think, play on this case that a lot of guys thought that there's no space for me, or there's something wrong with me that I've got to domesticate or tame or something, right? And I think that was that some of it, right?
I mean, I think, yeah, they found a way to speak to young men that resonated. And I think I'm, the mother of 2 teen boys now. And it's really interesting seeing the messaging that they're getting. They are living in a completely different media world than I live in. And so over the summer when Donald Trump was going on, doing all of these, Logan Paul and all of the other podcasts, all of a sudden I noticed, before I even realized that they were doing that, my youngest son just like asking me about this and, ask me about different issues and saying things, but really with this like framing that I was like, ooh, yikes, where'd you get that? And it came across their feed, not because they are following Donald Trump at all. Like they're not, but they like sports, they like video games, and the algorithm must have made them a target for all of this kind of viral content.
And isn't that confusing? I mean, as a mom of boys, I think it and this isn't a sort of, oh my gosh, it's so hard to be a man kind of thing. I mean, because obviously there's still patriarchy and things like that. But it is, I think, difficult. You get the term. It's so in sort of progressive circles, right? I mean, I live in Philadelphia. You live in New York City. I mean, there's some similarities there. You're from the Philly area, and you couldn't walk around a coffee shop in either of our worlds without hearing the term toxic masculinity, right? I mean, it's just all the time, right? And so then I think as a boy has got to be asking themselves, well, what's non-toxic masculinity? What is it? How do I embrace? Because I'm trying to be a man at some point. I'm trying to mature into adulthood, and what would be non-toxic, right? And that do you find that a struggle as a mom of 2 boys, like how to point them to masculinity that's not that where they can feel good about being boys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful they have a lot of males in their lives that are good role models for them. But yeah, I mean, I do think that it does make me kind of cringe in a way that I probably wouldn't have if I didn't have 2 boys, when people throw around toxic masculinity so much, or like, just sort of make blanket statements about men or young white men. I am more, I it makes me more uncomfortable now, because I do see how they feel left out in that, and they feel kind of alienated. Not that I've heard them say that, but I can just imagine that I would feel that way.
Yeah, I just had a guest on the show. The last guest wrote a book called Embracing Alienation, and it's a great book. But that alienating feeling that you don't quite fit, right? And that's just and for him, that's actually something you got to get in touch with, right? It's not, the alienation is for him, that sort of out of your skin feeling. If you can sit with it, can be liberative, but it's not easy to sit with it, right? Because you just, and that's just a hard thing I think about for guys. And this is where there's something like, I'm not a Jordan Peterson guy, right? I think I just did a podcast about how he reads the Bible, which I think is really curious. I mean, I just saw him explain to Bill Maher the Book of Jonah, and I thought, wow, this is really strange. Like, what he gets out of it is just really, really weird. But I see why he appeals, like the appeal, because if you're a guy, it's to see someone that's intelligent and confident and sort of, and is negotiating ideas in the world and talking about existentially weighty things. I mean, that's attractive, right? And I don't know that on the left we're always providing those voices for guys and for young men that are boys and they're coming into young men. I don't know that we're great at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely the realities that this election really cracked wide open to see, for everybody to see, are real. Like there is, this really vast world of right-leaning media and podcasts and influencers that speak to that demographic. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's at least been so clarified and underscored by what happened with the results of the election, that I think and hope a lot of smart people are going to, be thinking about how to respond and how to reach these demographics, and how to break the stranglehold of this this narrative and this way of thinking of masculinity that, is not leads to people voting for Donald Trump and JD Vance and thinking, just responding to that message.
So I do another podcast with a friend of mine, Bill, and it's a little zanier than this, but I do a Trump impression all the time. And I just called him the day after the election. I said, the morning when I said, I mean, maybe not great for the country, but great for the show. I mean, whatever, because it's not really that Kamala Harris jokes aren't that great. It's like Obama. Yeah. Is there some reality for your business? This is maybe not great for the country, but good for business. And we're going to get more Trump books, I mean, is this good for business?
I don't think so. I mean, it's this point,
oversaturated. Is it oversaturated?
I mean, I think you could say in the last election, sure. I mean, I guess I'm not really worried about our business per se. I mean, I'm not worried about it. There's always going to be books that need to be written and ideas that need to be explored. I think the challenges are going to be more with how nicheified media is becoming, and how these, there's just fewer and fewer really huge media hits that do anything. I mean, even the really big hits now, like Fresh Air and Morning Joe, obviously they're great, but even those don't do anywhere near as much as they used to. So I think, when I think about how this changes the business of doing book publicity, I think it's more about how just figuring out how to get through to people when everybody is having this sort of like self-serve media buffet. And you have to really niche down and figure out how to get to people. They're not watching all this. They're not all watching the same thing. So I'm less concerned about having topics, because the world is changing so quickly. Like we need lots of smart people writing lots of great books, analyzing what the hell is going on. But then everybody needs to figure out how to stay on top of this really quickly changing landscape.
Let me ask you, what's the book, the idea that you wish somebody was pitching to you? What's the book that you want written that you just haven't found yet?
That is a very hard question. I mean, one thing that Andy and I talk about is that we love funny books. Did I ever set you up with Jarrett Kobeck on I Hate the Internet? I don't think so.
Yeah. I've had him on the show. Yeah.
So like that was
I like that book a lot. I like that book.
Like that was a book that was so trenchant in its take on internet culture, modern culture, so many different elements of our modern moment. But it was also really, really funny, like laugh out loud funny. And that was, when we started working on that, and that was sort of how we, when that first came into our inbox, Andy's often the first one to, vet it and start looking into it. And I just heard him like laughing out loud on the couch. And, he's not like a out loud laugher. So I was like, what are you reading over there? And that just goes a really long way. There aren't that many books that are really funny while being extremely serious and sharing a point of view. So, that's one thing. And, I think in a lot of ways, humor can really push a narrative. You can push the envelope with thinking and ideas with humor that you can't when it's straight. So that's one thing I would say. I would love to have more books that are really making good arguments and have a smart take on the world, but also use humor.
What are maybe like two books that are the listeners to this podcast you'd want them to read that you can guarantee, wow, this is something you're just going to profit from and love?
Well, there you go with another hard question, Scott. It depends on what people are interested in. I loved, there's so many books. We've worked on over 350 books, almost 350 books at this point.
This is so awkward because I'm asking, it's like, which is my favorite child?
You are
this is Sophie's choice.
Which of your 350 children is your favorite?
Okay, 349 of you, close your ears right now.
No, just don't listen to this, guys. I loved, if you like short stories, I love Chavisa Woods' Things to Do When You're Goth in the Country.
Me too. I love that book.
Love that book. It is, and she's funny. She is really,
she's
really
great.
Funny. That is one book that has a lot of humor, and it's short stories, all based on where she is from in Southern Illinois. So that's a great one if you like short stories. I'd say if you like science, I loved The Sounds of Life by Karen Bacher. And that was all about how technology and acoustic technology and AI are allowing us to hear all different elements of nature that we could never had access to before. So like sounds that like plants make and ways that like turtles communicate to each other inside their eggs and when they should hatch, how coral reefs make noise, the animals in coral reefs make noise that give messages to all sorts of other animals. So that one is just a book of wonder. I love that book.
Wonder is a great thing to experience, right? And it's harder as you get older. Mm-hmm. It's the difference between a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old at the zoo, right? A 4-year-old just doesn't think elephants should exist, right? Mm-hmm. They're not necessary to be there, right? So it's just a very different thing to take a 4-year-old than a 14-year-old. You're on your phone, whatever. Come on, mom, don't touch me. You forget just how wondrous the world is, and that there don't have to be platypuses or coral reefs, or it's just amazing, right?
Mhm.
We live in it. There's a great thing in Marilyn Robinson's book Gilead. She has this great sense. The main character says, "The world. This is an interesting planet, and it deserves all the attention we can give it."
I love that.
Well, this has been great to give you some attention, Leah. I so treasure your friendship, and it's
I
been a
feel
real just pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, I feel the same way. It is a real joy. And I now see why every single author I have sent to you comes back raving about the experience.
Thanks.
I have now experienced it firsthand.
I'm thrilled.